Welcome back, everybody, to section two of Campaign University. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you had a good time through section one. I'm George Affleck, and this is Mike Wilson joining me today. And today, this whole section, and there's about five modules that we're going to be going through today in this section, is Can I Win? Voter and Issues Analysis. This is a key area. There'll be some stuff that we'll touch on that'll be somewhat similar to the last section in the modules, but a little deeper dive into those concepts. Mike, maybe just give us a quick rundown of what we're going to go through in today's training.
Yeah, so for today's video, again, a little bit of a repeat at the end of last time, but this is super important to be able to really chew in on this stuff. And we're going to look at the past elections of the place you want to run. So looking at the votes needed to win, how they're distributed, what was the turnout, the other levels of election in the place where you're trying to run, what their turnouts were, what are the trends over time, key issues, candidate platforms, candidate tactics. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and then the accuracy of polls, everybody's favorite topic.
And that's just in the first module of this section. We'll also be talking about positions and opportunities and incumbents, demographics, polling, and then wedge issues will be our final module in this entire section. So stick with us. It's a deep dive in this one. And just a reminder, though, if you have questions, if you're in our Facebook group, please leave messages for us there. If you want more information about specific stuff we're talking about, if you want to talk about a mastermind with us, just reach out to us directly, DM us directly on Facebook, or you can email us through the website. And if you're looking for a campaign team, we've got a great team that we have with all the expertise. So we can't take on many campaigns, but we certainly work on multiple campaigns at any given time as a team. And of course, not here with us is Emil Scheffel, who's one of our partners, who's been a campaign manager on multiple campaigns. And I, of course, my background is as a candidate and a politician, but also a backroom kind of marketing guy. And Mike's background is also on the digital side, very involved in team management as far as campaigns go. All right, let's get into this first section, this first module of the first section. Mike, let's talk about past elections and talk about, take a deep dive into this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's do a quick recap, which you should have. You should have a good coverage, good knowledge of now, given our last video. So we will go back to our favorite Nevada State Senate, 6th
Yay,
district,
Ballotpedia.
which we noticed is quite now contentious at the time of the filming of this video. But
That's right.
back
We're
in,
not going to get into that. We're not going to
yeah,
get into that.
no, we're not. So back in the VASA we were looking at. So the first things we've pulled out for you to look at, we wanted to kind of give you a 1, 2, 3 votes needed to win, vote distribution, and turnout. So here we have the district map. So this is going to be your very first analysis. We covered it last video. So total votes is 33,000 plus 33,000. So we have about 67,000 votes. We see 134,000 people living there. So now we know how many of those actually voted. It's about half, a little bit under half. And we also want to show, which we'll get into a little bit later on, you can actually dig into that turnout really deep and look at who was early voting, who was a mail ballot. This is the Nevada Secretary of State. So they're going to have all the detailed results, who came out on election day, who registered at the last minute, what's the cumulative turnout. So you're going to be able to really dive into that number of the 66,000 of the 134,000 people living there. Where did they come from? And when did they vote? How did they vote? And all those deep dive numbers. And then, of course, we want to talk about the distribution of the votes. So we have a very close race in this election. It's very winnable. So that's the quick way to get in there and see right away. This is how many people lived there. This is how many people voted. This was the margin, and this was these were the turnout levels. And that's going to give you a basic understanding of how many people do I actually need to convince or get out to the polls, or convince and get out to the polls to win this election.
I mean, there are so many examples. Getting that vote out is such a key part of it. And when you see victories of less than 1,000 votes, that is a margin of absolute victory for any party looking to win, even up to 3 or 5,000, 10,000, depends on the size. But is there a percentage, Mike, that in your experience that is a number to think about? Is it like a 1%? What's the magic number when you think I got a chance here, or is it more about the area that you're running into as well? It's a combination of the data, but also how that thing swing. Does it swing, or is it always one? It's kind of a data, and is it both, or how is there a magic number people should think about when they're looking at these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, you want a margin that's tight, like, so
Hmm.
based on percentage, if you have 2% to 5% of the total vote is the margin in between the two candidates, that's very likely to swing. If it's 10%, to 15% of the total vote, that's gonna be harder to do, but possible. And then
Yeah.
the other thing we keep talking about is turnout. You're gonna wanna look at how many people, which varies very much. So, like, at a
Hmm.
presidential election, you're gonna have very, very high turnout, but, school board is gonna have very,
That's
very
right.
low turnout. So if you can get a whole whack of people to go vote for you for school board, that's gonna make a huge impact on the election where your turnout's maybe 20 to 30%. But a presidential election, you could drive people there, get them to the polls, but 80% of the people were going to vote anyway. So your turnout, push is not gonna have that big of an effect.
And quite often that turnout is quite, if you see a variance, and that's why it's important to look at multiple elections when you're looking back. Because if you see a variance of say 35 to 45% over, one from one election to another, and I've seen that kind of swing election to election, 35% showed up, and the next one 45% showed up. Absolutely different results because of that 45%.
Right.
And quite often the results when a higher turnout in most places, Mike, I would say it leans to the left generally if you get more turnout, generally, or you get more people of ethnicities or
Yeah.
women, people who don't, younger people. And so when you're looking at the data historically, and you showed a screen there with some of the demographics there, looking at that historically, going back several elections, going, okay, wow, interesting. In that year where there was 45% as opposed to 35% in the last election, or something like that, it was more Hispanic showed up, or more women, or whatever. That means if I'm the candidate that wants to win that, and I'm that in that 10% difference area, depending on who you are, how do I get those people in those groups to show up and vote for you? And that feeds into how you market, how you buy your ads, how you do everything, how you decide on your issues, to get that. If there is variances like that, it's really important to look at that and look at it historically too.
Yeah, very much so. And you're a little bit ahead uh
Oops.
of where we are, but you can look at so this is some polling in also in Nevada, although this is back to 2018, which we'll look at in deeper detail. But you can
Hmm.
see, it's talking to all adults. Are they likely voters or unlikely voters? And you're going to see that the likely voter is always going to trend to an older person. It's going to trend to homeowners. It's going to trend to Caucasians more often than not, English speakers. So that's where turnout really comes into play. The bigger the turnout, you're gonna usually get the younger, more ethnically diverse, and lower income back brackets coming out. So it's a huge thing you need to look at. And when we're talking about this election, the next thing on our list to discuss is overlapping elections. So you really want to look at,
And what is
okay,
that? Tell me what that is, so the
so
people
for
understand.
instance, in this election, it's a state senate race, but is there a really close governor race that's going to impact who it turns out to
Hmm.
vote because people want to get rid of maybe the governor is a
Right.
Republican. This is just a hypothetical for this election, and he's very unpopular. So you're going to get a lot of Democrats coming out to vote out the Republican governor.
Hmm.
That's going to help you as a Democrat
Right.
candidates somewhere else on the ballot or somewhere else on the ticket.
Hmm.
And, if you have a presidential race that's very exciting and has people, really into it, now you're going to drive your turnout up as
Right.
well. And then sometimes, the economy might be good, things might be going good. The presidential race is not even close. Now you're going to have really low turnout. that's something you're going to have to factor into your race as well. So that's how the overlapping elections come into play.
Is it a hierarchical thing sometimes in election campaigns? In my mind, I think say the mayoral race or a civic election, a municipal city election. Quite often, the mayoral candidate will lead the charge on the campaign, and like it does in the presidency, and that leadership really does matter. That if you are part of a party that the leader's resonating, you kind of go with the tide on that. And when you look at overlapping elections, if you're on the right side of that, is that always the case, or can you fight that? And you might have a governor that you're not aligned with at all, and that could be an opportunity, depending on what you're running for, to say, "Hey, look, you may like that guy, but it's important for my voice to be heard as well in our state or wherever you are." Can that work? Do you think?
It works, people do vote the ticket a lot,
Yeah,
and, there's nothing you can do about that, but many don't, and many are independent, and, I think the only thing you can do is fight, fight as hard as you can, even
yes,
in an uphill battle, because you never
yeah,
know, and that's where, we're gonna talk about, trends and key issues, so, you could be trending it could be trending one way in a presidential election, but you could find an issue that's gonna,
mm,
push back against that trend. For instance, a lot of candidates would, in an economic, if you're a Democrat, but the economy is on shaky ground and the presidential race is turning Republican because of the economy. I mean, you could be a very economically focused Democrat, a pro economy focused Democrat.
right,
Or famously, Bill Clinton in 92 was a very strong crime. He went very hard on crime, which would be a normal Republican issue, but
yeah,
he really stepped forward in that and arguably won the presidential election based on his hard stance on crime. So you can kind of
mm.
work against the trend to try and turn things in your favor. So issues do matter, and that's actually one of the things that we want to talk about is picking the issues that are going to move votes and matter to the people on the ground where you're running.
Obviously Trump's a master of that. As far as he became the working class hero. Here's and then you see that happening. Historically, you can see that happen where it goes back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. Who's representing the working class, the unions, and you can sort of see how that swings back and forth. But whoever can grab that vote can do quite well. And so it's messaging and really putting your focus on that. So trends, knowing what, and sometimes I feel like you can look at all this data, Mike, but sometimes a good politician senses what the trends, what's
Yeah, you can
happening, and
sense
where
it.
things are moving.
We just want to show, right now we're talking about can I win, looking at past elections.
Yeah.
So this is a poll. You want to find polls done in the election. This is done in Nevada, and it literally ranks the importance of
Mm.
the issues going into the election. And you can see healthcare here is the top issue. This was 2018 in Nevada, and then immigration was the second issue, followed by the economy at 10%. So, it's great to be able to get your hands on these. Crime is
Mhm.
at 9%. Sometimes the best thing you learn is what is not a big issue that you might think it's a big issue. For instance, the foreign conflicts here is at 3%. So maybe it's a big issue of yours, but if you talk about it all the time,
Right.
you're not going to get people out to vote based on foreign conflicts, just because it's not top of mind for people. Whereas,
Yeah.
healthcare, immigration, the economy, you're going to be, more people are going to be interested in your message. So that's really the importance of knowing which issues matter to the people on the ground.
And of course, each of those issues can be narrowed down more specifically too, because you can say economy, but that doesn't mean, budgeting in the state or something like that. What does that mean, economy? It might mean something to a 21-year-old that's quite different to a 40-year-old, or to a new newcomer to to the country, or so you really have to kind of go, okay, how is the economy, and how does it go, going back to the data that you showed at the top,
Right.
when you look at trends, then you have to correlate it to the potential voters that you think will be your supporters and connect the two. And so when you look, think, okay, economy, but it's also maybe it's housing, or it's just affordability, or rents. What could it be that within the economy that you can narrow down, depending on if you're running national, if a national campaign, you kind of have to be more broad. But when you're going state level, or in Canada, the provincial level, narrowing those focuses down and really sort of almost niching within those categories to find your messaging is important too. So
Super
combination
important.
of knowing the data and then looking at those trends.
So I think hopefully now George and I have given you a pretty good overview. You're going to look at the different levels, what you can run for. You're going to look how many people vote, how many people live there, what were the margins, how many people turned out, is it winnable, what are the big issues on the ground, what are the trends going backwards. And then what we haven't covered yet is really digging into the last campaign and the candidates and how they did and what they talked about. So,
Right.
uh, you know, the way I would always start is going and just so this is the winners, her social media. So we're just looking at her Facebook, but I would also do Twitter and I would do Instagram. You're going to get back
Hmm.
into the time of the election, and you're going to follow, just finding out what she was talking about and what was effective, what was the engagement, how many
Yeah,
people were viewing,
that's so
and
true.
yeah,
I mean, the engagement. Looking at this is literally a way to look at how what's resonating based on people's responses and likes and not and emojis and things like that. That you can sort of say, okay, I'm the opposite of that. That issue is obviously a hot one. I have my opinion on that, or maybe that's what I need to grab and take and run with.
yeah, really interesting for me here. We just saw that healthcare, 4 years before this election was the number one issue. And
Hmm.
here she is, talking about healthcare and union workers all the time.
Yeah.
Of course, COVID is also playing into that, but she really
Hmm.
took COVID, something going on in the news that everyone's dealing with, combined it with, the top issue and made it a campaign issue that really worked for her. So, you would have to find out, okay, how am I gonna, say give another position or talk about COVID and healthcare and hospital workers and frontline workers in a way that's different than she did, or
Hmm.
how am I gonna get into that dialogue and work to get my message out there better than she did, or show my point differently. So really important to understand how they did it, what tactics they used, and how effective it was.
And of course, all of this stuff is, social media stuff is generally available to you, unless they block you. You can see all of this for free, and you can even see their ad campaigns and see what they really focused on if they're still running, or pulling historical data like that. That kind of all this stuff's really important at that research level to figure out where do you fit in and how do you compete.
Yeah, hugely, and it's amazing what's there. I mean, you can even on Facebook, you can tell how much money they spent, you know, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
It will literally tell you that because of the political ad rules. And
that's
of
right.
course,
And
you can
Google's doing
go
that now too.
and
Yeah.
look at the basic, their website, what were the issues that were front of center for them, what was the bio,
Hmm.
how did the people volunteer for the campaign, what media did they get, and just really, really understanding what worked and what tactics were effective. And you're going to want to do that for the independent candidates. You're going to want to do that for the candidate that did not win. And really analyze the gaps and where there were opportunities. And then look what happened in the general. The larger elections at the same time, and those issues, and how it can come into play. So huge amount of ground to cover when you're looking at past elections. Really understand the data, but then go look at the messaging and the effectiveness and the tactics and the engagement. And once you put those two layers together, you should be able to start forming in your mind where the opportunities are for you to come in.
And you don't, again, we've said this before, you don't have to do all the issues. Again, it comes back to your own personal style, the things you care about, the thing that connect to your life stories. If you can connect your own personal stories, whether it's about your family or your job that you had or your business you owned or whatever, and connect it to the issues or the training or anything or the places you volunteered, and connect it to the issues, two or three max, and those are the things that you really focus on. It doesn't get overly complicated once you figure out these things and you match it to your personal style and your personal things that you care about. To then, and we'll get into this later on messaging and how you can message that, because it's instinctive. It's what to say because you care about it. Once you've connect the data to the things you care about, it really you don't have to actually memorize anything, because it becomes a natural approach to being a politician. You really just have to show that you care, know that these are the ones that you talk are you're going to focus on. Again, for me, when I was in office, it was really about the economy, financial stuff, and transparency in government. Those are the two things I talked about all the time, and they were very effective. And I would always kind of take those things that were key issues in the region I was in, and they always were implanted in stuff I would say, or I would find a way back to them. Even if a journalist was asking me something, one thing, I would find my way back or use those things that I cared about, understood really well, to take the message into the things that I understood and felt comfortable talking about. Because you don't want to be caught into a situation where you don't 100% understand the data or the issues that you may or may not be strong at, and you don't have a personal story about or a background in. That's a double whammy. So really think about, again, what are you passionate about in your life? What is your personal experience? What are the stories that you have that you can tell, and how do you connect it to the polls and the data that Mike's talking about here, and build that campaign and that personal brand.
Yeah. So hopefully you have a great, way to come in and analyze. In the next video, we're going to talk about positioning. So it's already tweaking in my mind right now. She was talking about healthcare and healthcare workers. How could you steal healthcare votes from her? Right away, my election mind was like, I could talk about the middle class economy and in a way that would steal that from her. So we're going to look at how you position versus where your opponents are, and really get your analysis going in the next level, which is how to turn it for your advantage. Looking forward to the next lesson. Of course, any questions you have on the data analysis or the polling, or we're going to go deep into polling later on. But on what we've talked about in the last two courses, the last one in the first section and the first one we just covered today, you can ask questions on our mentoring call, and put anything in the comments as well, and we'll get
Yeah, on our
back.
Facebook page, our group, get in
Yeah.
there and get involved, share your experiences. So yeah, that's a lot of info for this module. Mike, we're gonna get coming back to positioning is our next module, and stay tuned for that. Thanks for joining us in this module. In section 2, module 1, we'll be back for the next module. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.